The term tribulation has become synonymous with a 7-year-long period of judgment. The Bible actually never uses this word as a proper noun and never calls a time period the tribulation. The word in the Greek is thelepis, and it literally means pressure, and figuratively it means distress and trouble. The term is descriptive rather than identifying. This distinction may not seem important to some, but it actually helps clarify the true purpose of events that will take place in the last 7 years before Christ returns. Although there is not a tribulation per se, there is a time of trouble and tribulation that is coming as a precursor to the second coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. There are various viewpoints about this time period, but most believe this will be a 7-year period at the end of time, which begins with the Antichrist taking power and ends with Christ returning to the earth. It is a time of various plagues and judgments as God rids the world of sin. Most eschatological theories divide this period between 2 equal segments of 3.5 years. 3.5 years of tribulation, they would say, followed by 3.5 years of great tribulation. In most studies, this 7 years also corresponds to a 7-year peace treaty made between the Jews and the Antichrist. A peace treaty which will be broken at the halfway point of this 7-year period. As we discussed in the previous episode of this series, there is no 7-year peace treaty. To truly understand this period of judgment, we have to understand that John's time of tribulation in the book of Revelation is actually a New Testament perspective of something called Daniel's 70th week.
70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed.
The 70 weeks here in Daniel's vision actually represents 70 7-year periods. Daniel prophesies that God is giving Israel 490 years from Cyrus's command to rebuild Jerusalem after the Babylonian captivity, to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sin, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Basically, after 490 years, the Messiah will rule over Israel and the world. Now, these units of years are divided into 3 sections. First, there are 49 years that have already been started and were almost completed at the time Daniel got this word. Second, there are 62 weeks of years, or 434 years, that are yet to come. And thirdly, the 70th week of years is to follow sometime after that. This 70th week of years is the 7 years of tribulation in the book of Revelation. Now, there are some who believe that Daniel's 70th week has already been fulfilled. The most prominent of these views can be understood under the theory of preterism. Preterism looks at all of the prophecies in the Old Testament and the New, the writings of Daniel, and the prophecies of the minor and great prophets, as well as the book of Revelation, as already being fulfilled. This is an attractive theory, but when it comes to things such as the rapture, or the resurrection, or the second coming of Christ, the view of preterism falls apart because it spiritualizes those things that are obviously literal and will happen one day. There are things that were prophesied that have already been fulfilled, but there are also things that are yet to be fulfilled. Preterism looks at 70 AD and the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans as the end of an age. And yes, it was a major event in the prophetic timetable. But if you will look at Daniel 9 and 24 through 26, and even verse number 27, it is clear that there is a gap between the 69th week and the 70th week that will happen at the end of the world. From our perch in the 21st century, we have the benefit of historical hindsight. Now, much of Daniel's writings were prophetic for his time, but they are now historical commentary to our time. As such, the greatest evidence that the 70th week is yet to be fulfilled is the historical record and its relation to other prophetic books like the book of Revelation. As with all things, context is key. Preterism is an attractive theory, but in many areas and many degrees it comes up short. The greatest aid in determining the timing of Daniel's 70th week is the events which were to occur at the end of 483 years, or 69 weeks. Daniel prophesied that the Messiah would be cut off after 69 weeks. And it doesn't take much reasoning to figure out that this lines up perfectly with the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. At the end of 490 years, the Messiah is to rule, but at 483 years, he is to be cut off. Like the parable of the good king, the Jews rejected the invitation to come to the wedding of the king's son, which is the bride of Christ, the church. And so the kingdom was torn from them and given to another. The word for cut off in this passage is karath, and it means to cut, to sever. I believe that it mirrors the cutting of flesh and the passing between the pieces in Genesis 15 as God made his covenant with Abraham. When a blood covenant was initiated, a trench was dug, animals were sacrificed and placed on the sides of the trench, and the blood filled up within the trench. At the signing of a covenant, both parties would walk through the trench, and the blood would stain the hem of their garments. This was signifying the price to be paid by the guilty party if the covenant was to be broken. Abraham did not walk through the pieces in Genesis 15, but God did. And when he did so, he was telling Abraham that he himself would pay the price for the sins that would break the covenant. So when Jesus was karath, he became those pieces and shed his blood, that through it we are justified and cleansed, because he paid the price for the debt of our sin. The gospel was given first to the Jews and then to the Gentiles. And for centuries the Jewish people have suffered judgment for their rejection of Christ. But God is not finished with them. The covenant that God made with Abraham was unconditional, and thus God has reserved one more week, a period of 7 years, for them to once again rely on, believe on, and accept their Messiah and his salvation. Just as Daniel 9 and 26 foretold, the Jews cut off their Messiah with the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Renaud F. Showers even says that through his calculations, the 69th week ended the very day that Jesus entered Jerusalem triumphantly. I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but one day the Jews will cry out for Christ, and He will come to their rescue at the end of the 70th week. Once again, in hindsight, it is obvious there is a gap between the 69th week and the 70th week of years. In essence, the time clock has stopped for a couple thousand years and is waiting to be restarted. Daniel's 70th week is yet to be fulfilled. After the Messiah is cut off at 69 weeks, the city of Jerusalem will be destroyed.
And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. Daniel 9:26.
After the Messiah is cut off at 69 weeks, the city of Jerusalem will be destroyed. Well, we know that happened. This was a prophecy to Daniel, but it's history to us. We know that Jerusalem was destroyed around 70 AD by Titus, and there are some that believe that the fulfillment of verse 26 and 27 happened with Antiochus Epiphanes IV during the Maccabean period, and therefore these verses are not talking about the actions of an Antichrist figure, but this just does not line up with all the dates and timing that Daniel gives and history shows to be true. Antiochus Epiphanes IV was a bad man who did horrible things. He sacrificed a pig on the Jewish altar. He erected an image of himself. He even stopped the Jewish oblation, but all of these things were resumed later with the rebuilding of the temple, which would eventually become Herod's temple and eventually be destroyed itself. What I say next may come as a surprise. I do agree on one matter with this viewpoint. Verse 26 is not talking about the Antichrist, and it's not even talking about a future event, at least from our perspective. I want you to notice the wording because it is important. There is a natural division in the text that helps us to ascertain the truth concerning this verse and its exposition. It says, "The people of the prince to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary." Now, the prince to come is the Antichrist, but it's not he who destroys the city and the sanctuary. It's the people of the prince to come who destroy the temple and the city following the rejection of Christ as their Messiah. The literal translation of the Bible says this,
"And after 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of a coming ruler shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And its end shall be with the flood, and ruins are determined, and war shall be until the end." Daniel 9:26. Literal translation.
The Hebrew word for people is am, which means nation or countrymen. Daniel is saying here that it will be the nations or the countrymen of the Antichrist who will destroy the city and the temple. When Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed in 70 AD by the Roman Empire, it was not Europeans who destroyed the city, as it has been taught for many years. Rome would raise legions from their conquered provinces to help police those provinces and local people that they have conquered. When General Titus attacked Jerusalem, he did so with the 5th, 10th, and 15th legions with the support of the 12th, the 18th, and the 3rd, and a strong contingent of Arabs who hated the Jews. The countries of origin were from Macedonia, from the 5th Legion. Italy was the 10th, but Turkey was the 15th. Syria was the 12th. Alexandria in Egypt was the 18th and the 3rd. And so what you see is that the ancestors of the prince to come were from nations who would become Arab Muslims. Why is all this important? It's not a salvation issue, so why does it matter? Because it gives perspective to the rest of what we're going to talk about in this series. The 7 years of tribulation, the 7 years of trouble and trials and judgment is not for the church or even for the Antichrist. These will be affected, but they're not the target. The 7 years are for the Jewish people. It's about the Jews, for the Jews, and towards the Jews. The role of everyone else is secondary. The young man sat nervously while the elder gentleman reviewed his presentation. He felt as though he would crawl out of his skin. He was so nervous, but he did not want for the elder man to know. As the elder gentleman reaches the end of the document, he rolls it back up and sits back against his pillow and sighs deeply as though he is contemplating his response. "Everything seems in order to me," the elder gentleman finally spoke. "The contract is pleasing and the payment is sufficient." What a relief, the young man thought to himself. One stage was over, but the most unnerving one remained, upon which all else hinged. "Shall we bring in my daughter?" the elder man asked as he sends his wife to fetch their eldest daughter, who patiently was waiting in the other room. As she enters the room, the young man was taken aback by her beauty. She took his breath every time she walked into a room. She was the choicest of all the women in the village, a prize worth far more than rubies. As she sat on the couch between her father and the young man, her would-be suitor read to her the contract which contained the promises and commitments that he would make to her if she would be his bride. When he finished the reading, he then took a cup and filled it with wine from a container that he had brought with him, and he gently offered it to the love of his life. She knows what this means. She has two options. If she drinks from this cup of the covenant, she would be binding herself to this man as his wife. If she refused the cup, the young man would go on his way and the matter would be settled. Her entire life she has lived under the care, protection, and provision of her father. He was a good man, a good father, a good husband to her mother, and he felt this man would be a good fit for his daughter. The covenant the suitor had offered was more than she could have ever dreamed. Not to mention, she knew that he loved her. You could see it on his face when she passed by him. He was a man of respect and honor in the community, and out of all the ladies in the nation, he chose her. Without hesitation, she takes the cup and she drinks. They legally belong to each other now. They're married in every way except for that which leads to children. The young man takes her hands in his and looks into the eyes of his bride. "I'm going to go away for a while so that I can prepare a place for you. But as soon as I'm finished, I'm coming back for you, and you will be with me forever." Such is the typical event of a Jewish wedding proposal. The man would then go and build a room onto his father's house and prepare the honeymoon chamber. He may be gone for as long as 2 years. While the man is making preparation, the bride is also preparing herself, learning how to be a wife. During the time of preparations, many nosy people will come and ask the man, "When is the big day? How much longer till you go and get your bride?" This constant badgering would get old after a while, as you can imagine, and the son would rebuff such inquiries by responding, "I don't tell anyone the day or the hour except for my Father." During the period of time between the proposal and the final consummation, the contact between the two is limited. In fact, the groom would assign one of his friends to be the go-between, to be the bearer of messages between the two. Then, when the day arrives and all preparations have been made, the bridegroom will come for his bride with great fanfare and with the blowing of trumpets. A friend would go before him to set the stage, and as she comes out to meet him, he takes her into the bridal chamber for a 7-day honeymoon together. The groom, by this point, has assigned 2 men to assist him as witnesses, who will stand before the door ready to announce the public presentation of the couple. At the end of the 7th day, the groom will knock upon the door, and the witnesses will announce his coming. The bloody sheets from the consummation are displayed and then given to the father of the bride to serve as a testament to the sealing of the covenant and her purity. According to Jewish tradition, on this day, the husband and the wife are king and queen, blameless before God and all the congregation. And thus is the Jewish wedding ceremony. It is from this cultural richness that Christ draws the imagery of the new covenant, his leaving and his return. The church entered into the new covenant at the Last Supper, bearing witness of the same by the partaking of the cup of wine that Christ presented and said, "In this cup of my blood is the new covenant." The bride price was paid, and we were purchased by the shedding of his own blood on Calvary's cross. Christ told the church that he was going to prepare a place for them, but that he would be back again, and only the Father knows the day and the hour of his return. Christ said, "In my Father's house there are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you." We, the church, as his bride, as in the parable of the 10 virgins, are to prepare ourselves and look for his coming. When he comes, he is coming with the sounding of trumpets, and we will meet him in the air and enter into that place prepared for us for a 7-year-long honeymoon with the King. At the end of that honeymoon, we will step out and return with him. As we step out on that great and terrible day, Christ will wear a vesture dipped in blood as a testament to the sealing of his covenant. And we will rule and reign with him as kings and queens and priests forevermore. That is all the time that we have today. But in our next episode, we're going to pick up right there and talk about the rapture of the church. When is the rapture? Who gets to go in it? Is it after the tribulation period? Is it before? Is it in the middle? Has it already happened? And so on and so on. We'll answer all of these questions in the next episode of What Shall the End Be? Well, that's all the time that we have for today, and I just want to thank you for watching. If this show or the other shows that we're producing and other things that we're doing at Cross Life Church, if these things are a benefit to you and they're feeding your spirit and your soul and helping you in your walk with the Lord, would you consider being a financial supporter of this ministry? There's a lot of things we want to do. We need better camera equipment. We need better audio equipment. We need to hire some help to be able to do more and more. There's a lot of things we want to do that we're just not there yet. But you could help us get there and help us get this message into more homes and saving more lives with the gospel of Jesus Christ. You can send your gifts to the address on the screen right there, or you can go to our website, www.crosslife.tv, and click on the donate button there. Everything is a tax-deductible donation. Now listen, 100% of these funds are going to go into this ministry, buying the equipment and getting out into a larger audience. It's not going to go into padding my salary. I get a very, very, very small salary, and in fact some weeks I go without a salary so that I can purchase equipment needed to make this possible. And so 100% is going to go into this ministry. It's all 100% tax deductible, and I can tell you, as you've seen if you've watched these shows, this is good ground to sow seed into. We cannot do this without help, and you can be a partner in taking the gospel to the world. Now listen, if you do so, God's not going to bless you with $1 million in return. God's not a piggy bank. He's not a slot machine. You don't get to put $1 in and get 100 back. But what happens is when you give to allow the gospel to go forward, God does bless you in return. You're blessed by the gospel itself, and God blesses you and holds to your account the lives that have been reached because you made it possible. If you can't give financially, keep supporting us by watching it, and keep supporting by praying, because that's the most important thing that you can do, is to pray for us. Until next time, we'll see you later. God bless.